Dear students, hope you are well by the grace of Almighty Allah and safe from COVID-19 pandemic. Today I am here with you to conduct virtual class for the students of Honors Third Year, Department of English under National University. I am Mohammad Mamun Sardar, Assistant Professor of English, Government Regional College, Khulna. Today we are going to have a discussion on the novel Robinson Crusoe, as you can see on the screen, by one of the most prominent English novelist, Daniel Defoe. Dear students, now I am going to discuss the life and works of Daniel Defoe in short. Here you can see the birth and political and religious milieu of the period. Daniel Defoe was born in the year 1660. He was the son of a tallow chandler by the name of James Defoe, who lived in London. Tallow means animal fat and chandler means dealer. Tallow chandler is a person who deals in animal fat, and this animal fat is used for making soap, candle, etc. This was the time when Cromwell's Commonwealth had just ended and monarchy in England had just been restored with Charles II ascending the throne. Monarchy in England was abolished by Oliver Cromwell after the execution of Charles I, but it was restored in 1660 when Charles's son, Charles II, came back to England after a long period of exile and ascended the English throne. Here you can see a picture of Daniel Defoe and his lifetime. He was born in 1660 and died in the year 1731. Defoe's father, James Defoe, was a dissenter, a nonconformist, so far as his religious faith was concerned. Times were dangerous for the dissenters because the religious beliefs were associated with the beliefs of the Commonwealth, to which the new king was firmly opposed. The word dissenter means nonconformist, a person who does not conform to the prevailing religious faith. The dissenters or the Puritans enjoyed privileges during the reign of Oliver Cromwell because Cromwell himself was a Puritan and a strong supporter of Puritan faith. When Charles II came to power, both political and religious scenario changed in England. The Puritans lost their former privileges and the Protestants enjoyed all the opportunities as they were the majority. The Puritans were subject to suffering. They became a persecuted minority. They were not allowed to pray openly. They had to perform their religious worship in secret. Here we have information about the education of Daniel Defoe. Daniel Defoe's father, James Defoe, was a well-to-do tradesman who had given up his business of tallow chandling and became a butcher. He was prosperous enough to be able to give his son a good education. And the children of dissenters were not admitted to the grammar school and to the universities, thus making it necessary for the dissenters to provide their own private schools for their children. So here we can see that the dissenters or the Puritans were subject to severe discrimination during that time. Defoe was sent to Morton Academy at the age of 12 or 13, and there he learned French, Dutch, Italian, and Spanish. He also studied natural science, geography, astronomy, and shorthand. And the boys of the school were destined to be dissenting ministers or clergymen, but Daniel had no intention for this vocation. He never wanted to be a minister or clergyman. He did not want to join church service, but he remained a sincere dissenter all through his life. In his later life, Defoe became a businessman and dealt in goods as tobacco and liquor and stocking. He traveled in Europe and got married in 1684, getting a fairly rich dowry. Defoe was actively involved with politics of his time. He began to take an active interest in politics. He took arms under the Duke of Monmouth, who was the illegitimate son of the late King Charles II and who had risen against his uncle James II. And this incident, this political turmoil, caused great threat to the life of Daniel Defoe. His involvement in this rebellion is not known, but he was lucky enough to escape scot-free, whereas 3 of his old school fellows were hanged. Later, Daniel became a well-to-do trader. He prefixed the aristocratic D to his name Foe and thus becoming Defoe. Originally, his name was Daniel Foe. His father was James Defoe. But by adding D, he changed his name to Daniel Defoe. And things were very fine during this time. He was passing his time happily. He was a prosperous businessman during this time. He has often been regarded as an opportunist, and he worked as a paid agent of both Whig and Tory government. But life was not very smooth for Robinson Crusoe. Life was not very smooth for Daniel Defoe. In 1692, he was involved in legal cases over his business dealings, and got more and more into debt. Defoe was not very much fair in his business dealings, which in his later life caused him much trouble. And this time circumstances were so worse that he became a bankrupt. But he recovered soon within the next 2 years. He served King William as one of his private spies and was almost a member of the secret police. Wrote a pamphlet named The True-Born Englishman. This poem was a strong plea for tolerance and for a civilized attitude towards people of all nationalities. He got the favor of the king and fame. So this pamphlet named The True-Born Englishman brought name and fame for Daniel Defoe. But he was in trouble again. Life was not smooth for him. He was pilloried and imprisoned. Pillory is a sort of punishment where the prisoners are exposed to public abuse. He was imprisoned because King William was killed by a fall from his horse, and Queen Anne succeeded the throne, and the persecution of the dissenters began again. He was in the opposition. He wrote and published a pamphlet, The Shortest Way with the Dissenters, which was an ironical attack on dissenters, but taken literally and therefore misunderstood by both the dissenters and their opponents, and he was in great trouble. Warrant was issued and Defoe tried to hide but was arrested. He was sentenced to stand on 3 consecutive days in the pillory and also to pay a heavy fine. So this was a very insulting punishment for Daniel Defoe, where he was pilloried and he was exposed to all sorts of public abuse. So he had already written a poem, A Hymn to the Pillory, and it was an attack on those who had sentenced him. In this poem, A Hymn to Pillory, he attacked those people who are responsible for his imprisonment, and the poem brought him sympathy and support and popularity. People threw garland instead of mud and stone. The people were supposed to throw mud and stone to him, but they developed a liking for him, and instead they threw garland. It continued for 3 days. After 3 months, he was released on the recommendation of Robert Harley, an influential politician of that time. After his release from prison, he became a pamphleteer in the pay of Robert Harley. He became Harley's supporter and follower. He had no means to support his family. He started publishing newspaper and pamphlets in support of Harley and the government. He worked as a spy or secret agent for the government. And in 1713, he was arrested and taken to prison. Change of political power took place. Harley fell from power, and the newspaper came to an end. So we can see luck was not always in Defoe's favor. Defoe faced ups and downs in his life and also in the political ladder. Here we have information about the writing of this great novelist. Daniel Defoe never ceased writing. he was a prolific writer. His writing was both political and non-political. In 1719 appeared his most famous book, Robinson Crusoe. This book was very much popular, and he achieved name and fame by writing this novel, and this novel has made his name immortal in the history of English literature. He also wrote many important books. Among them, Captain Singleton, Moll Flanders, A Journal of the Plague Year, and Roxana are mentionable. The last phase of his life and death. Defoe retired from politics. He kept himself busy in writing. He was one of the most prolific writers. He was also involved in some business activity. But his old age was not peaceful. In 1730, at the age of 70, he one day disappeared because he was sued by a woman for debt. I have told you earlier that he was not much fair in his business dealings, and unfortunately he died in April 1731 in a lodging house. Dear students, we see that the life of Robinson Crusoe was not very peaceful. His life and career was full of ups and downs. Now, have a look at the definition of novel. A novel is a long narrative work of fiction with some realism. It is often in prose form and is published as a single book. And the word novel has been derived from the Italian word novella, which means new. A novel has got some important features like this, similar to a short story. A novel has some features like a representation of characters, dialogues, setting, plot, climax, conflict, and resolution. These are the important features of novels. Here we have some important information about the novel Robinson Crusoe. The novel Robinson Crusoe was published on 25th April 1719 and proved an immediate success. It became very famous overnight, and it is regarded as the first novel in the history of English fiction. And this single novel brought name and fame and popularity for Daniel Defoe. Robinson Crusoe is an adventure story with allegorical significance. This novel is read by all sorts of people. The juvenile readers, they take this book as an adventure story, but the matured or grown-up readers, they have another level of meaning. They find allegorical significance. The story of sin, punishment, and redemption in this novel. It has two different meanings. for the readers of two different ages. Defoe tried to give his readers the impression that his book was a true record of the actual experiences and doing of a real man stranded on an uninhabited island. Daniel Defoe has tried to make his story believable, and he has adopted several techniques for making the story believable. I will discuss those things later. Sources of the story of Robinson Crusoe. Adventure story was very popular during the time of Daniel Defoe. Sailors and adventurers used to travel extensively, and after returning to their own country, they used to narrate their experience in foreign lands. And Daniel Defoe based his novel Robinson Crusoe on such an adventure story. And here we can see the principal source is a book called A Cruising Voyage Round the World, written by a sea captain named Urs Rogers. So Daniel Defoe based his novel on the adventure of a real man, and the adventure of that man is narrated in this book by Urs Rogers. And these books, A Cruising Voyage Round the World, contains an account of the actual experiences of a Scottish sailor by the name of Alexander Selkirk. He was a real man. Defoe got the idea for the writing of this book from the actual adventure of the real man by the name of Alexander Selkirk. And this is the book, image of the book on which Defoe based the story of his novel. The protagonist of Urs Rogers' book, Alexander Selkirk, had been put ashore on the island called Juan Fernandez by the captain of the ship which he had boarded as a sailor. Selkirk was a sailor, traveler. He was traveling to foreign land, and Selkirk spent a little more than 4 years on this island, leading a solitary life. Selkirk had been involved in a heated argument with his captain, and he was put ashore with all his belongings. And he has spent a little more than 4 years on this island, leading a solitary life. And Alexander Selkirk was forced by circumstances to spend 4 years all alone on the real island of Juan Fernandez. After 4 years, eventually a ship under the command of Captain Urs Rogers dropped anchor off this island and rescued Selkirk from his solitary existence. Selkirk was very much fortunate because he got help from Urs Rogers and he was saved. Selkirk related all his experiences to Captain Rogers, and Rogers wrote a book named A Cruising Voyage Round the World. And Daniel Defoe based his novel on the account given by Captain Rogers in his book. Here we have more information about Robinson Crusoe. The novel Robinson Crusoe is the story of a man who disobeys his father's advice and leaves home to go to the sea. Robinson Crusoe had a great desire to be a sailor, to go to the sea, but he was forbidden by his father. He disobeyed his father's command and leaves home to go to the sea, and later he faced many troubles in his life. We'll come to know about these things in my next class. After several adventures, Crusoe is cast away on an uninhabited island where he is doomed to lead a solitary life for many years. He was the only man living in that island for many years. The book deals with the experience and activities of Crusoe on the deserted island. Crusoe was an active man, and he was involved in various kinds of activities, and in this novel we have a description of those activities of Robinson Crusoe and how he was saved and came back to inland. Crusoe faces suffering on the island because of his original sin, which consists in his disobedience to his father. In Christian religion, disobedience to father means disobedience to God, and for this sin he had to undergo severe punishment for a long time. Dear students, in my next class I will try to discuss the plot, characters and important features of the novel Robinson Crusoe. Before leaving, I request all of you to stay at your home and follow the rules of health to save yourself and your community from COVID-19 pandemic. Stay home, stay safe. Thank you very much.